Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches. And before I dive into today's movie, a quick announcement. Starting from next week, there's only going to be one video a week instead of two. I've got a lot of things going on in real life right now, and they're all good things, but they're keeping me very busy. So I need to scale back a little on the videos. With that out of the way, today I'm going to be talking about Disney's 1981 fantasy adventure, Dragonslayer. And the film begins in the fictional kingdom of Erland. For decades, this kingdom has been terrorized by the mighty dragon Vermithrax Pejorative. The fell beast is far beyond the capabilities of human warriors to defeat, and so twice a year, Erland's king holds a lottery. Every virginal woman in the country goes into the pot, and whoever's name is drawn goes into the dragon. The common people of Erland, tired of seeing their daughters fed to Vermithrax, because wouldn't you know it, it never seems to be a noblewoman's name that gets drawn, send an expedition to the world's last known sorcerer, Ulrich of Kraganmore, appealing for his aid. Now, the king is less than pleased by this initiative. He doesn't believe that Ulrich can defeat the dragon, and he does believe that the attempt would inspire Vermithrax into a devastating rampage. So he sends his brutal and cynical captain of the guards, Tyrion, to interfere. Interfering is something that Tyrion does with relish, killing both Ulrich and his elderly servant Hodge. But the sorcerer's power lives on in his amulet, and his apprentice Galen brings this artifact to Erland. Though not a fully trained sorcerer himself, Galen hopes to find some way to help the beleaguered nation. Of course, the young man still doesn't have the king's blessing to interfere, and if he does try to stop Vermithrax and fails, he's going to have both the monarch and the dragon out for his head. So Dragonslayer was one of a number of ambitious live action fantasy films that were released in the early 1980s. In addition to this film, we saw the release of Krull, Clash of the Titans, Conan the Barbarian, The Neverending Story. I have no idea why we had this kind of mini burst of fantasy films at the time, but I have no complaints. People at the time did, however. You see, this movie was the second joint production between Paramount and Disney after the 1980 Popeye adaptation. And like Popeye, it had a more somber tone and mature content than was typical of Disney films of the era. This movie's violence, adult themes, and a very brief glimpse of a nipple caused controversy amongst audiences who went in expecting it to be purely children's entertainment. Now, these factors may well have contributed to the film's poor box office performance, as despite generally positive critical reviews, it brought in only 14 million at the box office. With a production budget of 18 million, it probably needed to triple ticket sales to break even. Now, later years have been kinder to the movie. It's gone on to achieve cult film status, and I can see why. While the film does have its flaws, it has one huge shining glory that makes any such drawbacks feel almost entirely irrelevant, and that is Vermithrax Pejorative. When you make a movie called Dragonslayer, you'd better deliver a dragon worth slaying. And the makers of this film understood that, reportedly allocating a quarter of the entire production budget to bringing the antagonist to the screen. And it was money well spent. As recently as last year, AV Club put Vermithrax as number 3 on their all time list of great movie dragons, behind only Smaug and Toothless, which also tells us that the AV Club really overrate Peter Jackson's Smaug. It's probably the voice. For myself, I don't think Smaug is fit to even shine Vermithrax's scales. Yes, he's glossy and impressive CGI, but I can't imagine he made a generation of children quail in awe and terror the way Vermithrax did. Now, do the dragon effects in this movie look somewhat dated these days? Well, of course they do. This film is older than the compact disc in the Commodore 64. It predates the 1981 release of Tron, if you fancy looking into the state of CGI at the time. So, yeah, the green screen effects occasionally look a little obvious, and if you look for it, you can spot the limited articulation of some of the practical effects. But by golly, this was a dragon to remember long after you left the cinema. And I'm not alone in this opinion. Guillermo del Toro has described Vermithrax as one of the most perfect creature designs ever made, and George R.R. Martin described it as the best dragon ever put on film. Vermithrax Pejorative. All the reason anyone should need to see this film, and more than enough reason to overlook its flaws. And I'm not going to claim that the movie doesn't have flaws. It does, and the first and most obvious of these is the opening act is very much on the slow side. It does take quite some time for the movie to really get moving. Now, to be fair to the filmmakers, I think there were some valid structural reasons for not hitting the ground running. I've already noted the dragon cost a lot of money, and to introduce it earlier in order to provide more action would have either meant spending even more cash or cutting back on the spectacle of later scenes. The latter option would definitely have made for a lesser film. The former probably simply wasn't on the table, but even if it was, it might have backfired. There was a risk of overstimulating the audience early on, leaving them worn out by the time of the final act. Rather like Spielberg having to minimize the shark's appearance in Jaws, this may be a case where less is ultimately more. Still, I think more could have been done to tighten up the opening act, and I, in particular, think that jettisoning some of the comedic elements would have helped. The script's occasional efforts to be funny don't really hit the mark. They also seem rather misplaced in the film's otherwise very somber tone. Yeah, so sorry to hear a dragon is eating your children. Could I interest you in some jolly japes? Still, this is a case where I recommend that you stick with the film. It definitely accumulates momentum as it continues. And I'm also pleased to say that the wonderful depiction of Vermithrax pejorative is not the only feature of the film that's worth praising. I think it also does a good job with its more human scale adversaries. After all, when Galen comes to Erland with grand plans to defeat the dragon, he does so against the wishes of the king. And Erland's ruler remembers all too well the vengeance inflicted by Vermithrax when the former ruler, the current king's brother, angered the dragon. He has no wish to see that retribution repeated. Not only that, but Galen is self-confessed to not be a true sorcerer, but merely an apprentice. And so the king and his henchmen act to prevent the provocation of the dragon by any means necessary. Yes, they are callous and venal in their actions, very selfish and self-serving, but they are callous and venal in very believable ways. You can see why they act as they do, beyond just, well, because they're the bad guys. Now, they are bad people, mind you, but bad people who can rationalize their own actions themselves. Well, yes, it's a shame that 2 young women must be sacrificed every year, but surely the devastation of the entire kingdom would be worse. So it's well done. I think it's a good feature of the film. And overall, I highly recommend this movie. Next time, monsters of a slightly different type and a slightly different scale, given that they're on a TV show, in the form of the British series Primeval, which ran from 2007 to 2011. But that is next time. And as noted in the beginning of this video, it won't be out for a week. For now, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have seen Dragonslayer, let me know what you thought of it.